Perfect. So we are live, and I am going to have one of my friends come on, and we're going to chat about kids' health and nutrition, which is really, really critical, right? Because we have a lot of us that have kids, and basically it's crazy what people eat, I have to say, and what people feed their kids. So there are a lot of swaps we can do, and I'll let him explain, but it's really great because this is his whole area of expertise. So he should be joining and just, here we go. It's just coming up. But definitely figure out some questions you guys have and add them either to the chat box or let us know. Should be just a second. I don't think it connected quite yet, but it will. So, oh, there we go.
Hello there.
Hi, how are you?
Dr. Ashley, good to finally be able to connect and do this.
Yes, for sure.
How are you today?
I mean, tell me and tell everybody else kind of too what your area of expertise is and what you do, because I was just kind of saying a little bit of how critical it is, right, to have a lot of knowledge about health, especially for kids. A lot of us are parents, but again, it's really, really critical and not always the easiest thing to get your little kids to eat what we want them to eat, right?
Sure. Well, I'll give you a little bit of my background. My experience with kids goes back about 15 years when I became a part of a nonprofit. It was actually the way that I became involved was interesting, though. It was through music, oddly enough.
Cool.
My stepbrother has a nonprofit called Accept the Challenge, and it deals with childhood obesity.
Oh.
And he reached out to me back then to do music for the program.
Cool.
So that was sort of like where I first started getting involved with kids, because I got involved in his program. And then over time, I took on a bigger role in that organization on the nonprofit side. During these last 15 years, just give you the quick take, I was the nutritionist at the Center for Integrative Medicine.
Oh, cool.
In Tarzana, so not too far away from where you're at. I'm in Redondo Beach, for anybody paying attention.
Yes.
And so during that time, while I was at that office, ended up being put on the board of directors for the nonprofit. And kind of fast forward, at that office, I did about 8,500 consultations.
Oh, wow.
Very busy practice. And flash forward to 2019 is when I left there to kind of go my own way, and was doing private consultation for adults and working at a local gym doing some nutrition there. And when COVID hit was where everything obviously changed, and I was trying to sort of decide what my next move was going to be. The gym was temporarily closed down and weren't knowing what was really going on at the time. So I just decided to find a niche in kids' health and started Kids Get Healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And became certified as a youth nutrition specialist, and kind of got the website hustled up and began doing virtuals with basically families, I mean, when you're working with kids. But that's sort of the very fast story of, how this all started, with Kids Get Healthy in particular.
Yeah, so, I mean, I know from my perspective, right, as a parent, but I think you probably see a lot of families with, wide variety of conditions and things like that. But it's crazy, and I know there's a lot out there about how obesity in children is actually such a big problem, right? I mean, and I know it's a lot more, but it's crazy to me that shouldn't even be, an issue for them necessarily, right? Because
we knew that, or at least people that were paying attention knew that, especially when COVID happened, it was going to get worse in the area of obesity. And you just look at the numbers, it's tripled in the last 30 years, childhood obesity. and quadrupled since the 70s.
Wow. Yeah.
So, we're right now at 1 in 5 children are obese.
Wow.
And obviously, there's a lot more to health than just that, but this is obviously a major, major part of what I do, honestly. I mean, I'd say the majority of people that are coming to me for help, it is going to be, in that area.
Yeah. And so then what are some of the kind of top tips you have for clients, or, you know what I mean? Because it's, again, what we work on, right? I work on, and sugar is a huge piece, obviously, or just even
Sure.
cooking foods, right? Like having actual home cooked
Yeah.
meals. But I know that you have a lot of tips to share with people. So
Yeah.
I'm sure it's helpful.
Sure. I'd say, I mean, the very first thing up front is you're meeting with the parent and you're trying to get a lay of the land of like what really needs to be done right away, right? So as you mentioned, like with sugar, so I'm usually doing, your 3 S's, your sleep, sugar, stress, believe it or not.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think like kids, like a 12-year-old, but
They do. Yeah.
there's a lot more stressors in children's life than there was, especially when I was young. So I would look to address the main things first. You don't want to just skip over basics. So you're going to look at sugar intake, especially added sugar. So you'd be surprised. Well, you probably wouldn't be surprised, but it is amazing still to me. Just simple label reading. Begin to sort of coach people of looking at added sugars. So tip number one for that is trying to keep that below 25 grams per day. That's sort of your common recommendation, right? 1 teaspoon is about 4 grams, so it's about 6 teaspoons. So people's eyeballs jump out of their head when they see labels.
Yeah.
60 grams of added sugar. So we're looking at, your added sugar first. Things like when it comes to kids and stuff, managing screen time, having like really clear boundaries on that. I think a very easy tip on the food side for parents to just really embrace this is that you decide what comes into the home.
Yeah.
And then the children should be left with the ability to decide what they would like to choose from those foods. But it's still your job to gatekeep what comes in the home. And that's also something I think that is often overlooked.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what am I going to do? And then, you work with that and with case by case. So I'd say that's the first one. And then just, screen time and sleep and all these things kind of go hand in hand, but there does have to be pretty hard boundaries on those things. Those are the main things, right?
Yeah.
And then, you kind of layer it out.
I love that too, because a lot of people forget to equate, right? That sleep is so critical actually for just the proper functioning of your body. But even when I'm talking to adults that are trying to lose weight or just be healthier, right, in certain ways, going to bed early is one of the biggest, most impactful things that they can do, right? And usually people just want, the foods or the supplement or things like that. But
right,
it's especially kids, it's really important because you're setting up their habits for life, really.
Correct. And it's interesting that you said that about people will think it's about this and this. And one of the things I try to do is set the expectations early on.
Mm-hmm.
I'll ask the parent, what is it that you think I do?
Yeah.
What is it that you think I do? What is it that you'd like me to do?
Mm-hmm.
To kind of to see where they're at with that. Because it's going to be far more than just food. In fact, many situations, there might be several sessions where we don't even talk about food yet,
right,
per se.
Yeah.
We're talking about a lot of other things, because if the task is, I want my child to lose weight. Well, my question is, what's getting in the way of that? And those are actually going to be the tasks at hand.
Right.
To tackle what's in the way before we even get to that. Another thing I'd mention is hunger. Fundamentally so simple, but also so often overlooked is, I say hunger always wins. Hunger is going to win. So teaching parents, teaching kids about hunger and satiety, how food works, like which foods make you feel satisfied longer, the order of foods to eat, just literally kind of teaching people very simple, easy ways of just flip the order, have a little protein first, and we can see good results with that. And kids can pick that up really well, actually. teaching them comfortable eating, getting them to learn when they're actually feeling satisfied. So this is another huge one that I come across.
Yeah, so my daughter is about 10 and a half, and she went through like a crazy growth spurt, like this last year. She grew almost 6 inches, right? So her hunger levels got
Wow.
and so still, it's shocking that you can have a child who's smaller than an adult, right? She's still smaller than me. But if I let her, and I don't want to say it like that, but like if she was just going off her natural urges, she could eat like, 2 Amy's pizzas. And so you have to explain. And I
Yeah,
feel fortunate that at least I know, and I kind of come at it from like a science perspective a little bit, right?
sure, sure.
Saying, okay, well, we need to actually sit back and, see how your body is going to react and feel if it's still hungry in maybe 15 minutes after you've consumed, what I would deem as your portion in your meal, right?
Right,
So
right.
a lot of the times now she's seeing, oh, I'm not hungry, after that time is set in. And I don't know if that's still the correct amount, but I basically have used this terminology a long time, right? That it takes about 15 minutes maybe for you to feel the fullness of what you're eating. I
Yeah,
don't,
it's about 15 or
okay.
20 minutes on the hypothalamus. Yeah, yeah. Which goes to the point with schools now rushing children through their lunches.
They,
A lot of times by the time they get their lunch and actually have to sit down to eat it, they're actually basically essentially forced to eat it faster than that. So really,
yeah.
that's a problem. You're
And
teaching children to kind of rush through their
yeah,
meals.
they're motivated because pretty much there's always playtime, right? If
Right,
you eat lunch early, then you get to play. And
right.
so
So
it's like a big,
get the food in.
it's preschool, right? So I think it actually does set up our patterns of how quickly we eat, right? If you're used to that in school,
Yeah,
there's a
it absolutely does. And so you could put that in the category of mindful eating or whatever you call it.
Mhm.
But yeah, like you said, from the science perspective alone, just for your brain to get that signal that, okay, I'm full.
Right.
So, slowing things down,
Hmm.
being mindful of that time period. And there's just so many things that influence hunger. Are they underhydrated,
Right.
underslept? What happened at the meal, maybe at the start of the day that's causing crazy cravings throughout the day? So meal to meal, what's going on? There's just a lot of things that are affecting hunger.
I would say too, and I'll let you add in on this what you see, but a lot of the traditional breakfasts are just very starch heavy and sugar heavy that a lot of people think
Right?
are healthy, right? Like they're, let's say, some sort of cereal with oat milk or something, or oatmeal, and
Yeah.
it doesn't really set up your kids to have a great day.
Right.
And
Breakfast foods.
exactly.
Right. I mean, the breakfast food thing is something that's, it's a modern
Yeah.
invention, and it's sort of look at the history of breakfast cereals and even just modern day eating patterns are very much
Hmm.
sort of driven by keep people fed and working and is kind of industrial revolution
Yeah.
era way of feeding. And when you look around the world, if you're still looking at countries, third world countries where, their breakfast, lunch, and dinner all looks identical.
Right. Yeah.
They're gonna have like fish soup,
Right.
each meal. Like, so this breakfast thing it's a modern thing and it's certainly an American thing. Saturday morning cartoons, breakfast cereals, and you're right, it does kind of set up the day to just be on this roller coaster ride with blood sugar.
Have you been seeing, so do people that seek out your help basically come because they think that, is it also just mostly with weight loss, or are there behavioral issues that they think are tied with food as well?
Yeah, it is mostly weight loss, but for sure behavioral. And that's kind of actually where I've been finding more and more my lane, if you will, of really addressing the behavioral side. It's something I really enjoy and take to and love studying it. I'm fascinated by behavior.
Right.
And so that's often brought to me. One thing that sometimes uncomfortable for parents is the first session is always, well, almost always going to be just with me and the parent.
Mm.
Usually the mom,
Right.
usually, right? Usually it's mom. And I will press them on their own behaviors because we know, children learn through modeling, and, I want to sort of go through that discussion of leading by example,
Yeah.
because, the obvious thing would be, I don't understand why my kid is so nervous and excited. And you're just
Yeah.
like, you don't understand? So I look at that because I want to know. And then family dynamics.
Mhm.
So are we talking about an only child?
Right.
Are we talking about several kids, birth order,
Yeah.
right? Step kids, the modern family stuff, seeing dad on the weekends, what's going on there, right? So,
Yeah.
and that's, there are times, and I'm really big on stay in your lane. There are times where I'll say, on the psychological side or the mental health side, I can do so much, but if it gets to the point where I think that there's some other outside help needed, then I might recommend that either instead of me or in addition to,
Right.
or before, we even get to the food. So yeah, it's a big part of it, the behavior. And it's sometimes they're just acting out for some reason. There's a lack of connection going on in the home. So I'm trying to find that out because that is one of those barriers to get to like where you start to talk about food,
Right.
So
Definitely. It's crazy too because people, I forget, maybe they don't know quite as much about the all of the, I'll just say more of the dyes or preservatives or the sweeteners, right, that
yeah,
have a huge biological impact. And
yes,
so,
yes,
but they're very hard to avoid all the time, right? So it's like even when you
sure.
have those things at home, they're still in a lot of organic treats and things too, right? So it's not
Yeah,
just
I
because
mean, we've seen,
foods or Trader Joe's, it's clean, right?
right. I mean, we've seen the organic definition get bigger and bigger every year.
Yeah.
What can get captured and called organic and natural, and then when you go into the environmental products and the greenwashing,
Yes. Yeah.
and it's an area I know that like it's interesting, Dr. Ashley. Uh, your areas are areas where I'm probably the least knowledgeable, but the most curious about,
Mm.
whether it's mold, toxins,
Yeah.
epigenetics, Chinese medicine, which I know really nothing about.
Yeah.
But that's become more of an interest of mine, is these obesogens and the endocrine disruptors. So it just goes beyond just your food colorings and your additives, but just the environmental picture.
Oh,
So it really get deep. You got to get the big rocks out of the way, and then you start getting into these details, which actually really matter.
they do. And I would say, because I have focused on a lot of those for so long, I also, though, was realizing and seeing that basically so many people don't do those foundational things, right? Like
Right.
going at a good time, getting just good, like before you even try to go, right, like gluten-free or any of that, like they're just eating
Yeah.
things that are not
Just
food.
your get your basics down.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's true. And when I've been sort of in health and wellness since the 90s.
Right.
And you see things come and go and trends, and in our own research, we get excited about something, we want to try something, always having to check my biases on how I'm looking at the situation, and
Mm.
always kind of going back to fundamentals,
Right.
because what might seem very simple to people like us that are just involved in this day in and day out, it's not for a lot of people, right? And so you do have to check in and get those basics right.
Well, and that's the thing too, is like I tend to be more sensitive to lots of foods and whatnot and have been, but I grew up on all of the, 80s food
Yeah,
as not as a staple, but they were in my life as
sure,
treats and snacks, right? So,
sure.
and so then I think for kids now they don't understand, like, oh, why could you have that and I can't, right? Or I
Right,
give,
right. This is the other problem, right? I mean, it's like, am I, like, they make me feel bad? Am I a bad parent? What do like, and why, my friends having this, why can't I? There's a lot of that. that's tricky. I would love to come on here and be like, I got the answer. It's like, no, there's actually not one great answer. It's just a lot of questioning, and again, it comes back to connection because
Mm-hmm.
if you need to kind of create those inroads with your child to sort of get there, to be able to, what I call pacing and leading. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's not my phrase, but I like to use it where you kind of have to connect first and then you can lead. And then that connection can sometimes be tricky because you're up against a lot of, you know, between the smartphones, the distractions, the TikTok, whatever it might be, the kids, the modern era lends itself to, I mean, we didn't have to worry about being filmed on cameras when we were
Yeah.
kids or this sort of cyberbullying aspect. All of this
Yeah.
matters too.
Do you,
So yeah, it's a big problem.
sorry, I was going to say with that, because I think this has gone away a lot and is like a family dinner, right? Or a family meal in the day. How is that?
Right.
Do you focus on trying to get that in, with what you're doing with when you're talking about connection and food and
Yeah, and I'm always encouraging having a sit down, we're eating together. And for some people it's counterintuitive, but I always emphasize when you're eating with your family, it's actually the time to not be talking about food unless you're talking about how good it is or do you want a little more. But you shouldn't be giving nutrition talks and putting that into
mm,
a child's ear at the time of the meal. It's like the worst time to be doing that because you're really like associating what should be an enjoyable time of connection with like a lecture,
right.
or something. And so that's the time when people think about food and they want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I finished this, and that's actually no. So I bring that up a lot. Another thing I bring up in terms of mealtime, uh, there's a sort of idea called pedestaling,
Mm.
where pedestaling is this idea of finish your plate,
Oh,
you'll get dessert.
oh, yeah.
If you eat this, you'll get this,
Um,
and then
is that
that
still,
puts the you'll get. What's that?
is that still a big thing? I know it was when I was.
It's not as common, thankfully, because people are kind of getting hip to it, but it still exists. Where in other words, like the dessert is seen as this kind of prize, and it puts it on a pedestal. So it's actually far better to just plan that in as part of the entire meal, and even have it at the table at the same time. In other words, put things on that level playing field, and then that kind of takes away that pedestaling. In classic reverse psychology, then you're not kind of shining the light on the thing that you don't want them to think about. So there's a lot of these little tricks that you
Yeah.
pick up along the way that can be actually really helpful.
We do this thing because, again, because of, my knowledge with sugar and food and things, and we're not a big dessert family, but any time you have a child, they just gravitate and love dessert pretty much, I'd say.
Sure,
Even when you do your
sure.
not to be like centered around dessert. So sometimes we do something called a dessertizer. So we do
Okay,
dessert first and then
cool.
so that it's like I don't know, I feel like just the processing of that with the body might be better for just change it
you,
up.
it's switching it up, whatever it takes. The idea is, you begin to look at food, at least what I found has worked.
Yeah.
When I'm speaking with children, we always hear about this thing of relationship with food. How,
Mm.
what's your relationship with food like? And, children like to learn with stories and analogy. And often I'll ask a child, like, do you have a friend that you like to see all the time? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah. And you always feel good when you see them all the time. They make you feel good. And they can understand it that way. You see, like, then there's certain people, you like them once in a while. If they were
Yeah.
always around with you, they're like, oh, yeah, that's Tommy. He's annoying. Like, but there's nothing wrong with Tommy,
Right.
right? Tommy's like, Tommy's Tommy. But Tommy all the time might be a problem. And then you can kind of connect that in with food. It's not this food is like some sort of evil thing. It's like,
No.
would you always want to eat this all day long? It's kind of like hanging out with Tommy all day long,
Yeah.
and then it starts to make sense to them on using those kind of metaphors.
Well, and another thing that I have tried to break, and it's a pretty big thing, is not using food as a reward, right? Or like
Yeah.
calling it a treat. So
Right.
it's, and that's a huge programming just from being a child, right?
Sure.
Pretty much everyone's like, oh, you get a treat, let's go buy ice cream or whatnot. And so that's something that I've been working on for many years, right? To like give other things that are treats, but not equate that with
Right.
ice cream, I guess, or just say like, oh, we're just having this because it's fun. It's not because of some reward, right?
Right.
And
Right.
that's tricky, man, because everybody, that's reinforced all over, like at school constantly. I can't believe how much candy and things like that, are
Those
in school.
are the foods that are considered celebratory,
Right.
and so, and McDonald's figured this out many years ago with Happy Meals and
Yeah.
playgrounds and, kids' birthday parties. I remember going to kids' birthday party, like in fourth grade, it was at McDonald's and,
Isn't that thing? Yeah.
so you're connecting, this is emotional, we're all,
Yeah.
humans are irrational. Hate to say it, myself included. That's, we later in life when we're say, oh, I want that cupcake. Well, you want your grandma who made that cupcake. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like we want that feeling that we got at that party when we had that German chocolate cake that, everybody loves. And so there's all those emotional tie-ins to food that is also a big challenge. But, one way, I mean, like grocery store trips,
Mm-hmm.
something else that I found can be useful and interesting from a psychological standpoint is I always encourage going to a store. I mean, it's convenient. I get it. And look, you got to step up to technology, but including children, a certain
Mm-hmm.
age, I think when they get to like 7 or 8 and older, including them in that process. And one method I like using, say you're in the grocery store, you're loading up your cart. Again, you choose
Right.
what's
Yeah.
coming in, but to put that to your child and say, okay, go find 3 things that you'd like.
Right.
Now,
Oh, yeah.
now the caveat with that is don't add don't add. This is the part that people are like, really? Like, don't add any rules. Don't like
Oh,
it's got to be healthy. It's got like just allow them to just make some
huh.
choices. Well, limit the number of
Yeah.
choices. That does a great job of so they feel like some empowerment to that. They can go find their thing. You might grit your teeth with this, but
And it's not over
that process,
the perimeter of the store. Like it could be.
right? It's like it has to be for the perimeter. Like those things, it's super tempting. But
Yeah.
by doing that and then having that kind of built in, like there's 3 things, right? So like however often you go to the grocery store, I go once a week or whatever. There's only so much damage that's going to be done in the home, and when that's brought back home, then that becomes, well, those things that you picked out, like have them when you want, but it's got to last you a week. But
Yeah.
they chose, so it's in their mind at least. I think it's like a more of a fair approach, and they feel heard, understood,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a lot of this, the give and take. You're still in charge.
Yeah.
You've got 97% of the groceries. Those few items allow them to kind of feel their way around. And I found over time, because most of the food, when we make those changes, the palates change, right? And children start to crave things that you would have never imagined that they wanted before.
What about because so many, I think, like, again, my daughter's a little older, so she's gotten more adventurous with foods, right? I mean, she always liked very interesting things, but a lot of, had maybe like a shorter or a smaller amount of things she just loved. But
Right.
I have so many friends still that basically do, the variety is very little because the kids just like flat out refuse. I used to
Sure.
think, I would think like, oh, if they're hungry enough to eat, like when they have willpower, they will not, right?
Yeah,
But
it's tricky for the most part when they're hungry enough to eat. But yeah, I mean, there's texture
yeah,
issues, tastes. Look, and if we really get honest with like the research on vegetables, I mean, there's lots of. I think it was probably 5, 6 years ago now. There was a big article on this. I remember that kind of opened my mind to this of just primitively speaking. I mean, children are naturally adverse to vegetables. They are. The
Yeah.
bitters, they like sweeter things. That is a natural thing. And so exposure,
Hmm.
this idea of exposure means simply that, not exposing and trying to, open their mouth and eat it. It's having it around often. In other words, don't just, if they refuse it, don't just take it away,
Mm.
from the table. Keep it around, eat it yourself. Maybe some
Right.
of the other kids at the table like it. But if you just look at the data on exposure, that's probably the best bet to use
Hmm.
for new foods to start coming into the diet. There's a lot of anxiety and overwhelm around that issue.
Hmm.
Like, is my kid getting enough variety? Um, the one thing, especially like children's metabolisms are very efficient,
Yeah.
and even when you start looking at like their protein requirements and their ability to, muscle protein synthesis is just so incredible in children. The way they turn over nutrients and so true nutrient deficiencies are pretty rare,
Yeah.
in the Western world. So the variety thing can come,
I guess,
you
guess
know.
I get
Uh,
more, I personally am more concerned when they're, and the parents usually are too, when they won't eat meat at all, right? For many
yeah.
years. And so,
Yeah, that's where you could run into,
yeah,
because you get, I mean, the nutrients developmentally
right.
in those foods are critical. So yeah, that's where you got to get clever and creative,
Yeah.
with sort of, I never liked the idea of sneaking things in, but
Oh,
if
yeah.
if it gets to the point where,
Hmm.
that's the other thing is like I'm going to sneak this in. I mean, that's fun enough, but transparency is always good. Um, to be able to just so your kid knows what they're eating. I think it's a
That's,
good idea. But
yeah.
yeah, if there are true critical nutrient deficiencies, then you've got to figure it out. Whether it's find some foods with the nutrients that they need that they will eat, or potentially supplement.
Yeah.
You know.
So then what do you see, I guess, currently as maybe the biggest issue that you see with most of your clients or the kids now?
Uh, well, the issue being probably obesity.
Yeah.
The My answer changes a lot on this as far as what you think is a culprit.
Mm.
I think on the food side of it, processed food.
Yeah.
I still think that that's just like such a massive issue, if you will, of like that alone. If you're talking about a big rock to get out of the way, ultra processed, hyper palatable food is it just.
Yeah.
I think it's like 60 or 65% of all calories Americans eat are now in the category of processed or ultra processed. So, I mean, that's so I think that is a major thing to tackle. But as we're looking more, going back to like the obesogens and
Yes.
the other stuff, it's starting to become, again, I'm just constantly refining. We want to identify a culprit, but the truth is there's just a lot of people at the scene of the crime here. But I'd say that. And then I think that the social media and that hold that it's taking over children is completely unique. Still trying to sort out
Yeah.
how to perfectly tackle that.
You know what I've
So,
seen so much with kids that I've never seen before is this really big. I mean, I've had more kids with tics than I had seen in years, and I think there's partly, of course, like there's food and environmental um,
yeah,
some factors, but the way that they consume data and the way that we consume data in these like short bursts, it's
right.
definitely not good for the nervous system, right? And I've
Absolutely.
been like started to see a lot of neurological impact. That's a again, that's why I got so into this before of basically certain foods that are neurotoxins and things like that and excitatory. But
Sure.
this was 20 years ago, and that was a lot of
Right.
kids more with autism and ADD and ADHD and things like that. But now to have so many children with some sort of neurological,
Yeah.
I don't want to say impairment, but it's affecting their nervous system. It's crazy to me, and that is really scary because they've only had these phones, right? And not even for a lot of time yet. They're not
Yeah.
even 18, 20. And it is, like I said, I'm
Well,
in this, and it's like I know more kids with tics than I'd ever heard of in my entire career, 20, 20 years of medicine.
sure. Yeah, it's a huge issue, and it's hard to tease out
Hmm.
what's going on there. Like if it's the environmental food stuff, or the other side of the coin is not enough boredom. Meaning like I mean, that's like a huge thing too. Is the importance of boredom, the importance of downtime, the importance
Yeah.
of removing hyperstimulation. If you even look at I always give this example. I mean, years ago, my friend was telling me he recommended his son was like a teenager at the time, to watch The Godfather, classic movie.
Yeah.
And I think he might have been 16 or 17 at the time. And he said, came back and said, Dad, I can't get through that movie.
Oh,
Right?
it was more than
I,
right.
slow pace,
Yeah.
right? And I remember watching The Godfather once. I watched the whole thing. I love that movie. And if you just look through the decades,
Hmm.
media, the clips, the fast editing, it's a completely different world. So they, sitting down at a desk in school and trying to learn in the same way that, Abe Lincoln's kid, just sort of sitting there, the way that they're brought information, it
So yeah.
calibrates everything. And I think that's a big part of the puzzle too, a big piece of the puzzle where there's something in that. Because if you were to watch these children play a video game or something, they're locked in like a laser.
Right.
They can focus. In other words, like this person has a problem focusing, but if you give them a task that's in that wheelhouse, they're able to just lock right in and execute. So there's that too.
Well,
So
and saying too, because you talk about screen time a lot with kids, and so do you think? I mean, you would see there's a direct correlation, right, between not, suboptimal health, right, and even
yes,
in children and screen time.
yeah, 100%. And I mean, it becomes more and more clear by the day with that. I mean, and so those are the things that, as the parent, that's where the parent has to come in. And a lot of it is just being able to offer, like, you know, kind of speaking in the affirmative in terms of activities for the family. Like, we're doing this now,
Mm,
right?
right.
And again, that leading by example, because how often, the parents on the phone and
Yeah.
children are sort of looking, I mean, at the heart of discipline is consistency.
Hmm.
And if you want to bring discipline into your home, a lot of it needs to be where there's a consistency with what you are saying and what you are also doing.
Hmm.
Because, and look, I think that's fair. If you're telling your child, get off your
Right.
phone,
And then
and
you're,
they're watching you all day long,
yeah.
it's just not then a part of the family. This is what we do in this family. And so, we're going to watch TV now, and we're turning the phones off. We're watching TV now, and you throw your phone into the bowl on the coffee table or whatever that might mean. It's got to be a very clear cut line and example. I think that just goes a very long way, and that doesn't happen nearly enough. So I mean, we've all got problems with our with our screen time and our
Well,
phones.
and especially
So
too, it's, a couple of things with that, right? So I initially, because my daughter, again, she's 10, but I was explaining to her the difference of me being on my phone. It's not fun and games, right? Like she only sees the phone in her eyes, or she used to. Now she is a little bit more with it. But, explaining to her, I'm not on my, like I'm actually working. So I could work on my phone or I can be on the computer. And usually the phone is allowed.
right, and so that becomes the thing too of
Yeah.
like, what are we doing on the screens?
Right.
Because look, let's face it, we're not going to get rid of. Well, maybe we will. Maybe we're going to have some kind of, Minority Report hologram thing. Probably will happen, so I shouldn't speak too soon. But it is a form of a screen.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is true of being able to have a conversation about, okay, well, how are we using screens? And, one thing I go back to because when I was a kid, I didn't have this issue. But
Yeah.
one thing that I think, something that my mom gave me at a young age that was very interesting. We were kind of crowded in a small house together. I shared a room with my mom when I was about 8 years old, and she used to tell me, you could stay up if you're reading,
Mhm.
if you're
Right.
reading about. And so it was like this kind of thing of like, I ended up becoming a reader, because of it, I think. Well, there's books behind me here. But that, there was this kind of thing of like, well, if you're doing something that
Hmm.
is, productive and healthy activity, but yeah, knowing what's on that screen is also useful because it is different, right?
Oh, for sure.
There's games, and then there's actually like some great educational things that can happen with screen time.
Well, and I've seen too, again with the mirroring, right, is my daughter would basically, once I started seeing that she was then doing something on the phone or computer while we had a movie on, and I thought, oh no, she's mirroring me for sure, because I'm working, right, while we're
Right.
watching TV. But again, that needs to change, right? Because I'm trying to explain to her about less multi.
Yeah, well, and
Yeah,
then that's where you get into like, okay, where could I position that work time and really dedicate? I,
yeah.
that's what kind of scheduling where, I tell clients when they schedule an hour with me,
Mm,
it's kind of non-negotiable. They have that hour. It's just us to do that for yourself.
yeah.
It doesn't always happen. People will. It's like the financial analogy would be like pay yourself first.
Mhm.
People sort of pay bills, and then whatever's left is for them.
Or for their
Yeah,
family.
right,
And
right. But in looking at prioritization and going, I'm actually going to schedule this time,
yeah,
with my daughter to watch TV, where it's like an appointment. It
yeah,
almost becomes job number one is, this time I'm going to be, with my daughter, and it's just us. And it's like, it's baked into the schedule.
yeah.
And then usually things sort of sort themselves out around that. So that's, yeah,
No, it's really,
all very common, super, super common stuff, what you're talking about. This is like everybody's lives these days.
hmm and really important. So it's like even when you have more kids and two parents, then I'm sure that it's even more difficult, right? But it's because then
Yeah.
certain kids want their specific time with the specific parent, right? And
Yeah. What's the age gap? And,
mhm.
all of these family dynamics are very interesting to explore. There is no one cookie cutter solution when it comes to families. And, I think everybody has a crazy family. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like I got the craziest family. I'm like, it's just different flavors of crazy. What is a normal family nowadays, right?
yeah. What I guess because we'll wrap up, but what's something that you think is, maybe the best thing to remember if you are trying to make some changes in your house or
Yeah. So to give a quick answer to this, in inventory, I
mm,
would say,
yeah.
where, who, what, why, when, how, like these main questions. So, you know, what 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 food is actually in the house? What am I
Mhm.
what have I decided to bring into my home,
Mhm.
as a parent, right? If we're speaking to the parents. So that's sort of like right away, kind of going back to all the stuff at the top. To what behaviors do I want from my child, and am I exhibiting those behaviors?
Right.
Right. That's major.
Yeah.
Are the behaviors that I desire in my child behaviors that I myself embody? I think that would be huge. And then I would say, you know, the discipline piece of it, where, do we have boundaries
Mm.
in the home? And are we eating together as a family? Are we carving out and scheduling time together? Those are the big things that anybody could do. Individual advice on food and all that, it's sort of like going to vary. We're in the kind of era where everybody has like the best diet and they want to tell you about it. But I always say if there was one perfect way to eat, actually humans wouldn't have gotten this far because our adaptability is what allowed us to eat different ways. And so, but if I were to give a blanket statement, lastly, as a bit of food advice, is looking at how much whole food versus processed food
Yeah.
is happening. Maybe a boring answer, but it's still a critically important one, obviously, because 60% of calories coming from processed foods is, we got to get better.
Right. Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster, basically, which
Yeah,
is the nature of people's, the state of their health, unfortunately.
absolutely.
So, but I mean, not to be, but you tell people too, that the inventory is really important because a lot of these things, I always say to people too, there's probably, we look at your daily habits and there's probably one or two, at least one, that is making a big impact in your health, like not in a positive way, but that we normalize, right?
Right.
And I think that happens a lot. And so that doing that inventory too.
Yeah, just know what's actually happening
Yeah.
because life gets away from us all. Like, you can ask somebody, what did you eat? Like these self-reporting food surveys where a lot of this nutrition science comes from is a lot of people is relying on people reporting, and people don't even know what they ate 2 days ago. So like
Yeah.
a lot of it is just sit back, step back, and get a true, real inventory of what's going on. And people are often surprised at what that list might look like and the habits.
Yes. Well, thank you so much.
You're
You want to tell everybody
welcome.
where they can find you and
Yeah, on Instagram, Kids Get Healthy USA. Online, kidsgethealthy.com. That's my website where you can find me for consultation. I do free introductory calls to see if we'd be a good fit to work together. I think that's just always important to see if we can connect. And yeah, and Lawrence at kidsgethealthy.com is an email.
And what is your age range that you usually work on?
So the sweet spot, I would say, is probably 7 or 8 to 12, 13. Younger than 8 can be a little tricky, but I'll take it on. Adults, I also work with many adults. I carried over a lot of my patients from my previous job who still see me for consultation. So, 8 and older,
Cool.
let's say. Yeah. But for children, about 8 to 12 is like a really great age to implement a lot of, where these things can stick.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. And it's really important. Crucial, I think, really to get these patterns ingrained.
Yeah. Sooner than later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, then they start really having a lot more friend influence, like around 10-ish,
Right.
11, and it's really nice if you can have a good solid foundation in there prior to that, right? That's
Absolutely.
what I'm experiencing now, and so you have friends sneaking snacks and things like that, and it's interesting.
Also want to do a quick shout out to an organization that I've been with for just under a year now, Rainbow Chefs Academy. So anybody tuning in, you can find them on Instagram, and that's probably a whole other conversation, but an organization that is located in the Bay Area and offers health and wellness education at the K-12, actually. So I'm on the advisory board for them and doing business development as well. So that's maybe for another time. Yeah. And I would love to actually pick your brain on some of what you are expert in. Like I said, those are my weaknesses. So for my own selfish needs, I'd love to get you on and turn the tables.
I always love chatting about how critical food is, right? Because I tell people too, it's something that you have control of, and it's something that you are doing three times a day. And so all of your choices are really impactful, right? And so
yeah, gotta get the food right.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, ideally for the individual, but a lot of people, honestly, it's just getting the process minimal and actually having real cooked whole foods. That alone is already going to be exponentially better for most people.
Absolutely. It's a simple answer, but it's a timeless one. Real food.
But people overlook it.
Real food.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you,
Well, thank
Dr.
you.
Ashley.
Yeah, so much. And we'll do it again too and reverse it.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you.
Of course. Have a beautiful day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.